My name is Rayon, and a couple of weeks ago I moved into a new apartment. The seller was a young man, maybe in his early 30s, who said the apartment had belonged to his grandmother. She had passed away just a few weeks ago, and he no longer had any use for the place, so he put it up for sale. At first I didn't think much of it. The apartment was in a prime location, the price was fair, and I didn't believe in ghosts, so nothing about the situation spooked me. Old people die and their homes get sold. That's life. I spent my first day unpacking boxes, moving furniture around, and taking in the quiet charm of my new space. It was small, with 2 bedrooms, a cozy kitchen, and a living room that overlooked the street. The windows let in a lot of light during the day, and everything about the place felt warm and inviting. That evening I had dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed feeling content. It was the start of something new, and I was excited. The first night went well. I slept deeply and woke up refreshed, ready for work. The apartment was much closer to my office, so my commute was almost cut in half. I finished my day at work and returned home around 11 o'clock at night, exhausted but happy. All I wanted was to collapse into bed and drift off to sleep, but that's not what happened. As soon as I lay down, I felt restless. I tossed and turned, trying to find a comfortable position, but something didn't feel right. A strange sensation settled over me, like I wasn't alone in the room. The feeling grew stronger by the minute, and soon it was impossible to ignore. It was like someone was watching me, staring at me from the shadows. My heart started to race, and my skin prickled with cold sweat. I told myself it was just nerves. I was in a new place, and it wasn't unusual to feel unsettled the first few nights. But no matter how much I rationalized it, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me. When it became clear that sleep wasn't coming, I decided to get up and make some tea. Maybe the warmth would calm me down and help me relax. I got out of bed, crossed the room, and as I passed the mirror hanging on the wall, I froze. In the reflection I saw her. There, in the dark corner of my bedroom, stood a woman. She was tall, with long gray hair that hung loosely around her shoulders, and she was wearing a white dress. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes, dark, empty eyes, were fixed on me. The sight of her made my blood run cold. But then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. I stood there staring at the mirror, trying to make sense of what I had seen. It had to be my imagination. I was tired, stressed from the move, and my mind was playing tricks on me. That was the only explanation. I shook off the fear, telling myself it had been nothing more than a bad dream, and went to the kitchen to make my tea. As I stood by the stove, waiting for the water to boil, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to see her standing behind me. But the apartment was quiet, empty. I drank my tea, went back to bed, and somehow, despite everything, fell asleep. The next day, I went to work like normal, trying to push the events of the night before out of my mind. I convinced myself it was just a case of first-night jitters in a new place. But when I came home that night, everything changed. It was late again, just past 11, and as I was walking up to the building, I glanced up at my apartment on the 5th floor. I froze in the middle of the street, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, trying to figure out what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. I had locked the door when I left that morning. No one else had a key. No one could be in my apartment. There, standing in the window, was the same woman in the white dress, only this time she was smiling. It wasn't a kind smile or a gentle one. It was wide and unnatural, the kind of smile that sent shivers down your spine. And in her hand, she was holding something, a cup of tea. Fear rooted me to the spot, but only for a moment. Then my body snapped into action. I turned on my heel and walked straight to my car. I didn't care that I was leaving all my things behind. I just needed to get out of there. I needed to get away from whatever was inside my apartment. I drove to my friend David's place, hoping he'd still be awake. When he opened the door, he could see immediately that something was wrong. "Rayon, you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I wanted to tell him everything, the woman, the feeling of being watched, the smile in the window, but I knew how it would sound, crazy, delusional, so instead I just said, "Can I crash here tonight? I don't feel like going home." He didn't ask questions, just nodded and let me in. I spent the night on his couch, my mind racing, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, standing in the dark corner of my room, smiling at me from the window. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't go back to the apartment alone, but I needed to figure out what was happening. I told David I had to deal with some personal stuff and headed back to the building in broad daylight, hoping the sunlight would chase away the fear that had gripped me the night before. When I got there, everything looked normal. There was no sign of the woman. The window was just a window, empty and unremarkable, but the fear I had felt was still fresh in my mind, and I knew I couldn't stay there another night. I took the day off work and immediately started looking for a new place. I didn't care how much it would cost me to break the lease or how long it would take to move all my things again. I just needed to get out. Before I left, I did some digging. I asked around the building, hoping to get more information about the previous tenant, the grandmother who had passed away. The neighbors were reluctant to talk at first, but eventually I found one older woman who knew more than she was willing to admit. "You're staying in Mrs. Latham's apartment, aren't you?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded. She shook her head, her expression grim. She was a strange one, kept to herself mostly. People said she was into things, dark things. I felt a chill run down my spine. That night, I stayed at a hotel. The next day, I packed up what little I had unpacked, put the apartment back on the market, and left. I don't know who or what I saw in that apartment, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. Whatever Mrs. Latham had been involved in, whatever dark forces had lingered after her death, I wanted no part of it. The apartment is still for sale, and every time I pass by the building, I make sure not to look up at the window on the 5th floor.